We've been waiting and they're finally here. The custom AIB cards from the manufacturers that make them. Tired of all the extra cables in your system? Well, Fractal Design has you covered with their new Ion series power supplies. Available in a variety of sizes and wattages, the new fully modular Ion Plus series of power supplies have what you need for clutter-free reliability. To learn more, click the link below. So what we've got right here is the 5700 XT Red Devil from PowerColor. In my opinion, PowerColor has always been one of the go-to brands when it comes to AMD, and this might be, in my personal opinion, one of the most aesthetically pleasing designs they've personally come out with yet. Obviously, we're going to talk about all about the card. It's a custom PCB, custom cooler, even custom BIOS, dual BIOS, all that sort of stuff. And it even came with this nifty little holder, which unfortunately was only part of the press model. Let's face it, if you're in a position to have one of these just sitting on display, you're doing all right. But let's go and talk about what comes in the packaging right here. Now the Red Devil, it's kind of the top of the line when it comes to PowerColor's product stack. It's got the most design going into it, it's got the most overbuilt VRMs, it's got the best bin GPUs, I mean, you name it. If it's a top tier product that can go in there, that's what they do with the Red Devil. And then from there, it goes down to like the Red Dragon and this whole lineup. This is a retail box, however. This is the special edition, and it's only a $10 premium over the base price of a Red Devil. So this is $449 versus the normal price of $439. And they're only doing a single run of these. So if you're watching this video and you're considering getting it and you want the extras that come in this box, you've got to basically act now, because I know it sounds like an ad, but this is only available to the first run and it's only a $10 premium. So you get this awesome rigid aluminum flip open box, and what you get in here additional with the graphics card is, well, some are going to love it, some are going to hate it. This is an RGB mouse pad. It is a rubber base and it doesn't move, and it's 100% natural and 100% RGB.
You're just reading the specs on the back.
Okay, so anyway, basically what's different is like the mouse pad and all that sort of stuff. So if you're interested in that, then there you go. So when you take out this stuff, you can see there's kind of a breakaway of the card. People don't care about that. But also with the Red Devil, you get the Red Devil membership card. And this basically gets you access to like live tech support and all that sort of stuff. As you can see, foam cutout for the card to protect it in transit. But nobody cares about the box for the most part. I mean, the brands do, but once you take it out of the box and it goes in your system, that is obviously what you care about. So here we go. Custom PCB. As you can see, it's taller and shorter though, actually, than the standard PCB, because there's a lot of dead space that exists on the PCB with the 5700 XT, and that is because of the blower fan sitting on top of the PCB. So they don't put any components there, they put it behind and in front of that fan. Once you go with a downfire or open cooler like this, you can then utilize that space for additional VRM phases or just shortening up the card. And then in this case, making it shorter and then making a really long cooler that overhangs the back of it, which is perfectly fine because I don't feel like this card is abnormally large. It is taller, so for small form factor builds, you have to think about that. The additional height could be a problem, but it's got dual 8-pin power. That's because there are dual BIOS on this card. There is a silent BIOS, which has a TDP of 180 watts, and then it's got an OC BIOS that's got a more aggressive fan curve and a max TDP of 220 watts. But then because of the dual 8-pin, the actual theoretical overclocking power draw or TDP of this card that's allowed is about 300 watts versus the 220. But you can see the thickness though, it's about a 2.5 slot. That's because it's got 5 heat pipes and of course all of these massive heatsink fins that are designed to apply plenty of cooling to the VRM power delivery as well as the memory and then the GPU core, of course. Now, one of the things that AMD does with the NAVI architecture, and they did this with Vega as well, but more people talked about it with NAVI, that is the fact that we can see edge temp and junction temperature. That's basically the hot spot on the die, the hottest portion of the die, and the edge temp, which is the coolest. So you can kind of see what the temperature spread across the die is. One thing we noticed with the 5700 XT and the Radeon 7 and Vega and all that stuff is that the junction temp can get pretty toasty. 110 degrees Celsius in many instances, and that's okay, that's normal, that is perfectly fine with the silicon. In fact, if NVIDIA was forthcoming with those temperatures, you'd probably notice the exact same behavior there. But they don't, because that 110 doesn't look as good as 80. But when it comes to the actual power delivery on this, it's got a 7-phase VRM design, so you're gonna get nice, clean power delivery to your GPU to theoretically maximize your overclocks. It's got 3 90mm ball bearing fans to make it nice and quiet, but of course plenty of static pressure and airflow over the fins, but it's also pretty quiet unless you start to ramp up the cooler, which you should do. Now, one of the things that I'm really excited about with this Red Devil is it's like they listened. I've always complained that companies that will force a color on the card, like a red trim or a blue trim or whatever, or like in MSI's case, a gold trim, you limit the buyer to people that are only wanting to either one, buy whatever card's available, and if that happens to be the best, then they'll do that, or two, where that card matches a certain color aesthetic. And for a lot of people, they'd rather have the option of choosing. Putting RGB lights on a card that has a static color that doesn't change, like a red trim or whatever, is just silly. So they actually did away with the red that is normally all over the Red Devil card and have added addressable RGB lighting on the top, which has various modes that come with the Devil Suite, where you can control all of the RGB. In fact, you can even make this a temperature gauge, where as the RGB, or the red, it's set to red, goes higher and lower, that shows you from 0 to 100 what the max temperature is. So you can kind of get a visual representation of what that looks like. On the back of the card, or technically the I/O, you also have illuminated I/O on the back right here. There's red LEDs in each of the video ports. So if you're trying to plug in another monitor or something in the back and it's dark, you can actually see them because they illuminate. So that's kind of a neat feature. And then regarding the back plate, it's a pretty neat design here where you've got some opening on the back where it overhangs, the air can actually blow through and into the rest of the chassis. So instead of having it bounce off the back plate and then kind of have turbulence in there, the air can go right through the heatsink, making it more efficient on the back. And then the edges or the ends of the heatsink and the heat pipes are typically where the hottest anyway, because the heat travels. So you're gonna get a better exhaust and ventilation of the heatsink right there, allowing more airflow into the chassis. And you have a cutout here behind the actual GPU socket. Instead of just putting a thermal pad and letting the heat backplate become a heat spreader, there's always a debate on whether or not that's functional or necessary. So instead they cut out right here just to allow direct heat rising or convection or just dissipation of heat on the back of the GPU die without having it insulated by a backplate. So I know what you guys want to know. Is this card worth it over the standard XT? Well, in terms of pricing, it's $439 if you don't get the special edition, but you get the same card, the special edition packaging rather. So for a $40 premium over the standard blower style cooler at $399, let's see how it compares. Now I did the better part of a day of testing on this card, just this one card in our typical test suite. And we compared it to the 5700 XT, both of them using press drivers. Now I know that some people go, well, blah, 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 test drivers. We've never seen any negatives in terms of better performance on a press driver versus retail. In fact, we typically experience more bugs and weirdness with those drivers than anything else. This card not excluded. We did have a couple of anomalies we want to talk about as we move forward that you might have noticed on the chart. But the cards that we compared it to specifically were the 2060 Super, because it's in the same exact price category. We also compared it to the 2070 Super. Not really compared, but more so put the 2070 Super on there as the next tier benchmark, because we've talked all about it before. If you want to go higher than a 5700 XT with AMD, you can't. The 2070 Super would be the next logical jump if you weren't dedicated to any one team or the other. And what we found was, although the pricing of this card is smack dab in the middle of a 2060 and a 2070 Super, and by 2060 I mean the non-Super, like I said, this was much, much closer to the performance of a 2070 Super, in fact beating it in some titles. Those titles being AMD titles, which probably has a subroutine for performance, but whatever, I digress. If those titles are the titles you care about, then you should know that this card did match or beat the 2070 Super in some titles. So that's why we put it in there. But at the end of the day, when it comes to overclocking though, this is where it starts to get a bit interesting with AMD. As you all probably know at this point, AMD really does benefit from an undervolt. In fact, in this instance, we undervolted it from 1.2 volts down to 1.135 or 1135 millivolts, and we saw a significant reduction in temperature, but no reduction in stability, which allowed the core clocks to stay over 2000, usually right around 2050 to 2080, more of the time versus when we would just have all the standard settings set. But we didn't actually move the max clock because by default, the card is gonna try and get as close to 2150 as it can because that's what the stock driver allows for. So we didn't actually increase the clocks at all. What we increased was how long it stayed at whatever max clock it found it was comfortable at. So with a small undervolt and then moving the power limit all the way to the right just so that we can let it theoretically draw as much power as it wants. And then by upping the fan curve to 100%, which is noisy. Any card at 100% is noisy. But at that point, we don't want temperatures to get involved. We want to see how far the card will go. So we saw a pretty good improvement to performance just based on that. But you're not really overclocking at that point. You're just increasing headroom, if that makes sense. The card is still overclocking itself. Now let's talk about some of the anomalies. Firestrike is weird. We have now seen that Firestrike, which is a DX11 test, favors NAVI. We have just seen a ridiculous improvement in performance in Firestrike with NAVI cards to where this card was even scraping the 2080 Super in terms of performance. Almost 30,000 points in GPU score in Firestrike on this. And then of course, Extreme and Ultra, the same story. But speaking of Firestrike though, one of the anomalies that we saw with this particular card for whatever reason, and we think it's driver related, not so much driver related with this card, but with the reference card, this actually lost to the reference card in Firestrike, and we can't make heads or tails of that for whatever reason. I ran the test multiple times, and for whatever reason, the 5700 XT reference was beating this card. That's an anomaly, it's an outlier, it doesn't paint the picture, but we're just explaining why the charts look like they did. In fact, Phil, who did the testing for the 5700 XT, even had notes on the spreadsheet going, weird crap happening, don't know what's going on. So some of the other anomalies we saw, Hitman. The Hitman loves NAVI cards, it performs really well there. But at the end of the day, if you compare this on those charts, like I said, it becomes extremely dangerous to the 2070 Super, given the fact that this is just mid-range NAVI. They mature this architecture, NVIDIA's got a problem. And when you start seeing custom boards like this coming out shortly after the launch of the cards that are pushing core clocks now over 2000 megahertz, all they need now is the density. They just need to get more of them stream processors crammed into the die. And I think most gamers do care about raw horsepower. And so that's why this card is one of those things that just makes us excited for the future. When AMD told us the future of NAVI is going to be like Ryzen, where it starts out as a disruptor and then just completely snowballs from there and gains momentum, so we could expect amazing things to come from the future with NAVI, I think this card is evident of that, because the manufacturers are certainly having a field day with this and pulling out a massive amount of performance. So if you guys are shopping in that mid $400 price point, you can't deny that NAVI's here and it makes a splash. So anyway guys, that is our review of the 5700 XT Red Devil from Power Color. If you guys want to learn more about this card, I'll put a link down below, places to buy, all that sort of stuff. They could have probably charged more for this card and they didn't, so that's a good thing. All right guys, thanks for watching. And as always, we'll see you in the next one.